And you're right. And that actually is kind of a segue into kind of what our other topic of the day is. I don't think there has been a constant flow of content recently.
Right.
And that's what I was warning people about last year, going back to what we were saying before, was when people were like, why don't they just release Top Gun already? It's been done for 2 years. Why don't they just release Ghostbusters? And I warned people, I'm like, because we're going to hit a patch where when they haven't been working and they're not going to have anything to release. And we're going to get a bunch of garbage because it's all the shit they've had sitting on the shelf for the last 3 years.
Yeah, we are watching what I call dead entertainment. You know, and again, this story says it. You know, there's still interest, but will The Way of the Water be another box office smash? Right?
Because that's my big point here from earlier was like,
no.
Wow,
this is so misleading. If you read these articles from today about the box office response to Avatar, it's again, this is hopes and dreams. This is wishes. This is
there's 1,500 people watching and only a couple hundred likes. So please hit that like button if you haven't already.
Yeah, do this.
And let's get into this because you're right. All the Variety and I think what was a Hollywood Reporter you said, Andre, also had a positive headline.
Yeah, most of them have like positive write-ups.
Yeah. And they're not totally wrong because as Chris pointed out, compared to most re-releases, this was a pretty big one compared to what Jaws did.
Spider-Man No Way Home.
Even Spider-Man No Way Home. This did very well.
Stuff. Yeah.
But this is also supposed to be leading into a new film coming out in just over 3 months? Not even really
December,
3 months.
December.
Yeah. And not only that, there's nothing else to compete with it. Really, if you look at it.
Black Panther, Tom.
No. I'm talking about in theaters right now.
Oh, yeah, I know.
Like The Woman King and that other movie that hit #1 are the only two movies, and
Don't Worry, Darling.
Yeah, Don't Worry, Darling, and they made $30 million between the two.
Well, and not only that, I mean, you know, they are also touting the global numbers for Don't Worry, Darling. It made the same global money as this film made globally, I believe, $30 million.
Yeah, and that's the other thing is, it did okay overall, but my big question is how does this look for Way of the Water? And they even have that hedge here in this article.
I'll tell you, Way of the Water is going to be huge because
you think so?
Because it has no competition. I'm not telling you it's going to be a good movie. I'm telling you to be huge because the holiday release is going to be all right. What movie are we all going to see, and what can we all agree on? Everyone we're just going to see Avatar. Because this happens a lot around Thanksgiving when a lot of movies are released.
And you're not wrong, Chris.
Usually the biggest at the box office during Thanksgiving is an awful movie that you will forget the minute you walk out of the theater and you won't even remember that movie exists. Just go look at like releases around Thanksgiving and they're all terrible like romantic comedies or like family films or garbage like cute animal movies. It's awful. Because it's the one movie that the family can all agree. All right, fine. We're all going to go see this movie. We're not going to see the new Scorsese or Tarantino or big science fiction thing. We're all going to see this one dumb, awful movie. Tell me it happens. It happens to everyone around the holidays.
You could be right, Chris, but this is, I would say that the only difference we have now is this feels like a different time. It was like there was pre-COVID and then there was post-COVID. And it seems like families have learned to live without being able to go and do other things. And I'm curious if this is going to be a big enough draw to get enough people out of their seats at home and get them in the seats in theaters, because Spider-Man No Way Home is not a good gauge by this, because I would argue that had other value in it to where we couldn't really gauge if it was what you just said, that there was nothing else going on, or if it was the fact that Toby and Andrew came back. I think it was more the latter. To be honest with you, because that movie just had legs like a spider, basically. It just kept crawling and crawling and crawling, much like Top Gun happened to do a few months after that. So we've had two movies that have managed to do what this movie hopes to do. Mm-hmm. You could be right. You know, the old saying in Hollywood is never bet against James Cameron. Never bet against him.
Don't. I'm telling you, I think it's going to be huge and one of the biggest of the year. And I'm not going to tell you it's going to be a good movie. I just don't see it, especially that Shazam 2 moved. That helps it a lot. So we'll see. We'll see, man. I mean, we'll see what happens, but you're going to be looking around, and that's also the time of the year that a lot of people decide people who don't go to the movies every week. I am not the normal audience. I am an anomaly. I'm not a traditional normal consumer. I don't think anybody look, if you're watching this show, you're probably not a traditional normie consumer either. Maybe normie when it comes to certain genres or franchises, but that's the time of the year a lot of people decide, hey, let's go to the movies, right? It's a thing the whole family can do together and they don't have to talk to each other. So
yeah, you could be right. I do have one thing though that to get to, but I want to hear what Culture and Andre have to say on that note before we get to the other things I'm going to bring in here. Mm-hmm. So let's start with you, Culture, if you're back. How do you think A Way of the Water is going to fare after seeing this? Because before this, we were all just kind of grasping at straws, going, yeah, I might do this, I might do that. And, like a lot of us would say what Chris just said. But after this, I'm curious what people, because now we have a gauge we didn't have before.
Yeah, I don't think it's much of a gauge. That's the thing. It's just, look, this is the 667th weekend that this film has been in box office.
Yeah.
That's a lot, over the course of 13 years, that's a lot of time spent in the box office. And, I really do feel, and Chris said it very early in the stream, that maybe Cameron just did this to, bring back, some kind of, reference point for people, but at the same time, pad the original box office numbers, because I think he's been guilty of that now 4 times, trying to pad these numbers up. But I think this thing will probably hit the $1 billion mark, and I think it's going to be diminishing returns thereafter. I'm talking about The Way of the Water, and I don't think it's going to earn $650 million in the U.S. because I think word of water is going to, not be very positive on this after the first weekend. I don't think it'll have legs, but it earned the majority of its box office internationally. I think it was like 65-70% of its numbers came from out of the U.S., out of North American market. So it was a bigger hit elsewhere. Now, it could, if it gets a release in China, do quite well. I just don't know that Disney, who's kind of been at odds with China for a while, is going to be able to get this into China.
But maybe that's worth what? Bragging rights more than anything when they get 10 cents to the dollar in most cases.
Well, it is, but they get to report those numbers in the box office, right? And that's the thing. And right now we are at probably the lowest point in China's cinema history, or recent history. I'm going to put it that way, with the number of releases. They are having the same lull in content at the theaters in the cinema as we are. And that is, that's a global problem. And that's why all these indies, all these, all this dead content that I keep talking about is out there in the world making numbers that they really don't deserve. And, and it's also one of the reasons why we have, the earnings just are very unimpressive. So I look at this film and I'm thinking, okay, this might crack $1 billion, which again, puts it in some fair company. But we won't know the results of it ultimately until into 2023. And I don't think that films 4 or 5, by the time we get there with this franchise, anybody's going to care.
Andre?
Well, first of all, just in terms of the state of the box office, I think it's insane that Hulu is releasing Hellraiser as a Hulu exclusive, and ditto Universal is dropping Halloween Ends as a Peacock exclusive right now, when I think they both
another one, Hocus Pocus 2 on Disney. I can't believe that one either.
It's insane to me. But anyway, be that as it may, I don't think that this movie is going to break $1 billion. I think it's going to come close to it, and I could be way wrong here. I just don't see the interest. I mean, I see it in a worse state than having to build the brand value from scratch, because when the original one came in 2009, then it was because of the 3D, it became an event. I don't know that the sequel is going to be an event, because as the years went by, Avatar left zero footprint. People remember it, but it doesn't have like any kind of active fan base, active fan following. No. And I think that the movie is even held in lower regard because people were blown away by the visuals. But when you leave the visuals and you look at the story, it's honestly some of Cameron's weaker work. And now that is what you're going to try to sell. I don't know that people are going to be as swayed with this time around as last time around. Is it going to be big? Is it going to be big for any other movie? Yeah, absolutely. But I don't think it's going to break $1 billion. I think it'll be close. I don't think it's going to break it.
I'm more in line with you, Andre, and I'll give you some reasons. First of all, just some Fugazi reasons or whatever you want to call it. If you go back in time, James Cameron's biggest hits, he has always gotten a lot of flack around his biggest hits. Terminator 2 being the first one I remember where everybody's like, oh, you're spending too much money. It was the biggest movie. They're spending most money any ever spent on a movie. Not only that, the first movie was barely even a hit. Can't believe he's spending this much money on a sequel to a movie nobody remembers, right? That was only 7 years between those two. Terminator 2 became one of the biggest films of all time. Then you fast forward 10, not quite 10 years, maybe 5 years, and he's doing Titanic. Same kind of thing. He even had to sign over some of his rights to get that fucker finished. And everybody said the same kind of thing. It's never going to stay afloat. Just like Titanic, it's going to sink. The headlines are going to write themselves. And in the end, it became the biggest film of all time. Avatar, same fucking thing. What the hell is this guy doing? He's been working on this movie for 10 years. Is it ever going to come out? Is it even going to live up to the hype? Oh my gosh, it's this 3D thing. Oh, it's all CGI. Is it going to work? Blah, 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 blah. At that point, the only reference point we had was episode 1, and that'll come back. So a lot of people are like, I just don't know if this is going to work. And it ended up becoming the biggest film of all time. Now here we are with Avatar 2 and 3. He filmed at the same time. From what I heard, he basically got carte blanche to do whatever the fuck he wanted.
Yep. That was in exchange for the only thing that's keeping this film somewhat in the American zeitgeist is because of the development of Pandora at the Disney World park. They spent $1 billion building that before they built out the Star Wars Galaxy's Edge thing. And, you know, because he was allowing Disney to utilize his IP, you know, they backed him financially with these films. He's
had smooth sailing is my point, to use another pun.
Yeah.
And so I feel like that may be something, and he's kind of been living in this little bubble. If you've read or listened to any of his interviews since a lot of this stuff has come up, he is getting very, and it's not like the typical shit we're seeing out of other people, so don't take it that way, but it's like, you know, if somebody brings up how 3D is dead, he'll get very protective of 3D and say, well, I still think people will go say blah, 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 blah. And then remember, you know, his whole thing before was the 48 frames per second.
Ugh.
And it's like, dude, you are way behind the times. We have done this already. Where have you been? And clearly he's been buried in this.
The rest of the industry destroyed 3D for him.
Yeah, exactly. And he still thinks there's a place for it. And it's like, no. That gimmick is long gone. See, and that's the thing, is that's the gimmick that helped sell Avatar. I'll be honest with you, half the sales that movie got was because of the 3D.
I can even tell you from my perspective here in Norway, it was the combination of the 3D and that immersive experience. That's what made it event. It wasn't anything else. It was that. It was that whole thing that no one had seen or done before. But since then, of course, it had been done before, but no one of a certain age had ever seen or done anything like that before. Right. No one had gone
not to that
3D
quality
glasses to a theater or anything like that. Not to that quality ever. But since then, that became ruined. It was destroyed by Hollywood, by shitty 3D post-conversion after post-conversion. It became an obvious money grab, and it lost its luster. And now you're going to try to use that same thing again to try to lure people back in. That's kind of like the point. all of his previous movies, they had something new. They had something wanted. Schwarzenegger was the biggest movie star on the face of the earth in 1991 when Terminator 2 came out.
Not only that, video had built up the original.
Exactly. There was a huge demand for a Terminator Part 2. The moment when when that iconic teaser trailer dropped, like I don't remember that clearly myself, but I remember the hype when it got, even here in Norway, I remember the hype for Terminator. It was a thing. It was a cultural event. Everyone had to go see it. Same thing with Titanic. It was a cultural event because it's like something that really reverberated through history. He was able to use the hottest actors of the time. He was able to use like a love story, Romeo and Juliet, on the Titanic with incredible special effects, really immersive. People could practically feel it. Again, it was an event, but it was something new. Again, same thing with Avatar, something new. This is nothing new. This is a sequel that comes much later. And what does it offer new? Well, you go back to a world that you've been before that you didn't really want to go back to, but this time it's underwater.
Well, and that goes to my next point is
I don't know that's going to be enough new things. Sorry, Tom, carry on.
No. He hasn't done anything with the franchise. We haven't had video games. We haven't had an animated series. We haven't had anything. I don't even know if there's been books. Maybe some comic books would be about the most.
I don't think there's been any.
I don't think there's even been that kind of shit because he is so protective of this stuff. But like on that note, so like that's the thing is he hasn't really kept this alive in the zeitgeist.
And I mean, not only there has been no demand for it.
That's what I'm saying. Yeah,
there was demand for Terminator. Dark Horse's Terminator comics, they sold like hotcakes. Terminator video games from before the movie sold like hotcakes.
I know a few people who have that
for Terminator.
I was gonna say I know a few people who have that one-up Terminator 2 machine now that just come out.
Yeah,
I've been drooling over it myself.
For it, there is none for Avatar.
Yeah, and so let's compare this to actual current releases or re-releases.
Actually, there has been comics, but they're from this year.
Okay, see that I wouldn't count. Okay, so now this is a breakdown of here's some positives on the release. It was 2 times better than 2010's re-release, but they're not counting inflation. And that's another thing. None of this takes into account inflation. It did 85% better than Spider-Man No Way Home, 9.3 times better than E.T., and 3.8 times better than Jaws. And Jaws was a huge like surprise to the industry. That did so well. However, and this again, not taking in consideration inflation, and this is where I think it's telling of this. It did 42% below James Cameron's re-release of Titanic. And remember, these movies also had probably more competition than this movie did. And this is the one that sticks out to me the most. And this is why I said keep episode 1 in mind, because this is the one I think is the most comparable. 55% below 2012's re-release of Star Wars Episode 1. This was right on the cusp of all the Disney. We're getting more Star Wars movies. It still wasn't enough to drum up interest in the re-release of the prequels, so much that Disney decided to shit can the rest of the. They have them all in 3D. They never released them. They did the work between George and them, and they never released them because that did so poorly. They didn't see a reason to. 46% below 93's the 2013 release of Jurassic Park. And then there's some other ones here. And then the other closer one I could think of would be 2011 and 2012's re-release of The Lion King and Beauty and the Beast. And it's 66 and 43% below that in comparison. And again, I'm looking at this going, if those movies did better, and especially Star Wars with the hype that was building behind that, I think Andre's right. There is no interest behind Avatar. Now, I don't think you're wrong, Chris, that this movie is going to do well, but it's going to do well for those reasons that you said, and that's it. I really don't think that the world has as many drunk 3POs in it as we'd like to think when it comes to Avatar, because he's one of the only people I know personally who's that avid of a fan of this stuff, because it's James's own fault for not allowing this franchise to have some sort of life in the past 10 plus years in some way. It just hasn't. He hasn't done anything with it.
I just hope that, he was talking about the running time. The running time is not, from where I sit, it hasn't been revealed yet.
It's like 3 hours, I heard. Yeah.
That's what I heard. But like James Cameron's already saying, and I don't want to hear people complain about the running time. Put an intermission in. They do this with all these Indian movies. If it's north of 3 hours, they put the intermission in. It's usually like 5 minutes.
I wish.
You'll see like a clock. They'll do like a countdown clock and like a little graphic image, and it's like intermission. I mean, big movies used to do that. And back in the day, Lawrence of Arabia, Gandhi.
Even movies that weren't that long when I was younger, I remember having intermissions.
Gone with the Wind, had an intermission. Like a lot of movies have intermissions kind of built in. Like, this is a good place to stop the story right here for a minute. Now go to the bathroom or grab a soda, I believe that. In fact, James Cameron was also arguing that you should pay more for movies like his. So if a movie, seriously, like that's why like IMAX and 3D movies cost more money. It was James Cameron that said they should cost more money.
Yeah, it is.
And also, they do scale it now. So kind of what he was talking about, like you can go to AMC. They have these like $5 Tuesdays, or they have these like classics back in theaters, and they're $5, right? Rather than a normal ticket price, which is like 12 or 14 or something. I don't know. I'm an A-list member, so I pay $25 a month and go a couple times a week. So, but yeah, he argued that, and so we're kind of living that now, I guess.
But there's another thing that I consider here. We've mentioned inflation a couple of times, and even though Brandon was clear, it's slowing down now. It's slowing down. Oh, it's still increasing massively, but is increasing slightly less. But you're still at a level where, like, your dollar is going to be worth less now than it was 2 hours ago. We're still at that level.
Yeah. Well,
how much is that going to affect things? Come around Christmas holidays, people have to do their holiday shopping, stuff like that. How many people maybe are going to give that going to the cinema a miss, unless it's something really special, and maybe Avatar isn't special enough?
I think you hit the nail on the head there. I mean, right now we already know that they know how bad things are. How do we know that? Because all of the mega retailers that rely on the Christmas season to make their year, and especially make the last quarter, they're already having sales. Amazon is doing something unheard of. They're having their second Amazon, Prime Day, and it's coming in October. You have Target and Walmart already starting their holiday sales for the holiday season. We're not even to October yet. We're closing in on it.
Well, that's because I'm sure last year was one of the worst years they ever had.
It was. They had massive backstock sell-offs for Target and Walmart.
Well, I saw a report that says things are at the same level they were during the Great Depression, basically, or worse in some cases.
Yeah, we're actually pretending this isn't a problem. And global inflation, Andre, which you were kind of talking about there, or were directly alluding to, that's staggering. There are countries that are having just ridiculous percentages of inflation, and you're seeing currency parity near. You watch watching the fall of the British pound, right? The pound sterling is now almost at full parity with the dollar.
Yeah.
That's insane.
So Chris, I normally would agree with you that time of the year, perfect timing, nothing else to see. Of course, families, because I used to argue that nowadays, even as expensive as a movie ticket is, it's still a cheaper thing for a family to do than just about anything else.
Right.
Like go to a concert, go to a sporting event. Shit, you're going to shill out a couple $100 easy per person just going to some sporting events, and then add in going to like not a carnival, but like an amusement park or something like that is even more expensive. So going to a movie is still one of the few affordable things that most families can do as a family.
Yes.
Right. Next to maybe mini golf. And even that's probably more expensive in some cases.
Mm-hmm.
So that part I will agree with you on, Chris, but I agree with Andre in this point. We got a year end coming up here where there's a lot of people who are feeling the sting of this inflation. It's like, I may be working, but it's
what other movie is coming out around?
No, you're right.
to compete with it, there's zero. Like, and I think that also,
yeah, and because of that, you maybe just save the money and skip going to theaters around Christmas this year.
That's what I was bringing up with Spider-Man.
Have you ever been off for the holidays, cooped up with family? The best thing you want to do is escape. Let's all do something together where we're not going to talk to each other. Trust me. Like when my kids were little, let's get out of the house, something to kind of, it's just a different thing to do.
This is true, Chris, but we also have to remember we're coming
off true, but I think
of 2 years where people haven't been able to spend time with their families either, Chris.
And also in those 2 years, people learned about being online. I mean, piracy shot through the roof. The studios really killed themselves with streaming. And now when people have learned this is especially true of Disney Plus, like, oh, it's a Disney Plus movie. Well, I look forward to seeing it in the privacy of my home when it comes here.
Right.
And on that note, bringing up the streaming aspect, Chris, I know you said you thought it was a good idea that, they pulled it from Disney Plus, which I'm going to have to disagree with, because I think it would have been smarter for them to keep this movie as accessible as possible. Because you know what Top Gun did when that came out? They put it everywhere. You could get it everywhere. I think you still can watch it on Amazon Prime for free. They made sure that anybody could watch it. And I think they even did a quick re-release of that in theaters in very minimal low levels. But I think their best bet would be to bombard people with the original right now.
True.
Like you have to remind people that this was a big deal. And I think that's where the bigger problem is. And really them pulling it from Disney is just purely Cameron's greed. And it's exactly what I think you or Culture pointed out. And that is that he just wants to pad his box office for the first one a little bit more, just because I'm sure he's feeling the sting.
667 weekends.
Well, I'm sure he's feeling the sting of a couple other movies in the past few years knocking it off its top pedestal. And he's had his couple movies being knocked around the top 10 here in the last.
But you know what I also think? If that movie is too accessible, too many people check it out. Again, it's a movie that once you take away the theatrical experience of seeing it for the first time with all that crap dangling at you on screen, like when you don't have that and you watch this in the privacy of your own home, how blown away are you going to be? How well does the movie hold up? How tempting is it going to be to go to the theaters to the sequel to see the Blue Cats movie? How well does the movie hold up when you take away the experience that made it a huge event to begin with?
I've watched it twice, and I've never seen it in theaters. Actually, I've seen it 3 times. I take that back. I've seen it 3 times because I've seen the first time when it first came out, and I'm like, yeah, it was a thing. And then I saw the extended cut, and I'm like, oh, that was a little bit better than the other thing. Oh, and that's another thing. People are only remembering the extended cut. There's the few people that have seen it in theaters are bitching that they're missing scenes. It's like, yeah, newsflash, that was only in the extended cut, and the extended cut ain't in 3D, so that's not the version he's going to release. But then the only other time I watched it is when I bought this TV I have up here in this room. That's a plasma 3D. It came with Avatar, so I'm like, fuck it, I'll throw it in. I don't even know if I finished it, to be honest with you. I can't remember. I don't think I did. I think I got about halfway through and I'm like, yeah, okay, it's a thing, like it's not even one of the better 3D films, to be honest with you. Ant-Man is better in 3D than that, if you ask me, but that's just my personal opinion. But we do have to move along here. I don't know if you had anything else to add to that, Chris or Culture or Andre, but
I think of the 3D movies that are out there, I think that Avatar was among the best. It felt like a Viewmaster viewer. No one knows what that is except maybe a couple people here. Culture.
I had the Viewmaster.
Loved the Viewmaster. Loved it when you could watch like this sort of puppet versions of the Peanuts and 66 Adam West Batman TV show and cartoons.
I had I had 3 slides. Viewmaster with the 3 slides that came with it.
It was great because Avatar I thought so. That's
I loved the Viewmaster. In fact, you can actually play with a modern Viewmaster at one of the Meow Wolf installations, the one that's in Vegas. They actually have them sitting around.
Oh, that's cool.
There's a little bit of a collector market for those, actually.
Yeah.
But
Tom,
I
wanted
stand-
to see if there's yeah, sorry, carry on, Chris.
No, I was going to say, I stand by that. I think that with no competition, with, you know, the fact that it's kind of like, you know, off people's radar, I think it's going to be a huge hit at the end of this year. Is it going to do Spider-Man No Way Home numbers? Maybe not, but I mean, I do believe never count Cameron out. Look how he's surprised. Everything that you guys mentioned and the things that have failed that have involved James Cameron are projects that he was not directly involved in, right? Projects where his name may have been a part of it, or he was sort of.
That's a good point.
Yeah, this is true. He's never had a failure before.
No,
My only point was that all of the things that he had that succeeded, there were reasons for it, and none of them apply.
I'll throw one more thing at you, Chris, and this is just because I love you and I love throwing you curveballs like this. And I know you have a kid, roughly the same age as mine, and there was a kid I seen brought up this point. It was a very valid point the other day, and I wish it was during a stream so we could have talked about it. But now that I got this opportunity, I'm gonna bring it up now. He's like, I'm only 23. I don't get the James Cameron hype.
Oh, see, yeah, okay,
I was barely a kid when the first movie came out.
10.
Everybody talks about James Cameron. The only experience I have of James Cameron is him telling me that Terminator Dark Fate was going to be good and it sucked balls.
Wow.
So you have a lot of people who, I'm wondering, Chris, do you think if there's a whole generation coming up that they don't know, give a shit, or understand the hype of James Cameron?
Well, get ready to learn. Get ready to be learned.
Well,
well, you may be right.
At $200 million per sequel film, because it's $1 billion for the next 4 films. Oh, wait, no, I guess
that's the thing.
Yeah. So, you know, and I'm sure that budget has exploded since then.
I'm sorry, donkey balls. It may have even been Joel, for all I know. It was somebody that brought it up on, I think, a Twitter thing or in the Facebook group or something like that. And they're like, yeah, I don't get the Cameron hype.
It'll be $1 billion. I think it'll cross the $1 billion threshold. I don't think it'll cross it by much. And again, the barriers to it aren't
I
just
say 700 million. I think it's
I don't
about
think
as well. I think it's going to do about as well as the last few Marvel movies.
Ooh, that would hurt, man. Disney would be crying in their soup.
Maybe 8 or 9 if it's lucky. But
yeah, I'm thinking like 900 million.
The marketing on this thing is just crazy already. Oh man! All right,
but we'll see what it has, because it has a little competition after the first it drops. Yeah, everything moved out of its wake. Don't get me wrong, but I wonder if somebody would have been smart. That have been like, you know what? Honestly, if DC had actually had a decent Aquaman 2 on their hands, that could have been the one movie I could have seen giving it a run for its money. But the problem they have is the Amber problem and the fucking fact that the movie sucks, from what we heard.
Yeah.